Lieutenant Lena Hayes returned home after years away, carrying the resilience of a soldier within her. She never imagined that, right in her own hometown, an unexpected confrontation awaited her. A confrontation with prejudice and the abuse of power, threatening both her dignity and the peace she longed for. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the cracked sidewalks of Savannah, Georgia. Lieutenant Lena Hayes walked down the street with a quiet confidence, born of years of discipline, of knowing exactly who she was. Her deep brown eyes scanned the neighborhood, both familiar and foreign, like a childhood home left vacant for too long. She hadn't been back in 7 years. Not since enlisting, not since burying her mother. It was strange how little had changed. Still the corner store advertising 2 for 1 sodas. Still the barbershop with its faded sign. Still the basketball court where kids played as if their lives depended on it. Laughter, voices, the scent of frying shrimp from old Evelyn's restaurant enveloped her, pulling her back to memories she hadn't considered in years. She adjusted the duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She wore a simple, well-fitting t-shirt, cargo pants, and worn sneakers, yet even in civilian attire, she possessed a distinct presence, squared shoulders, a slightly raised chin, measured steps. It wasn't a quality she could simply switch off. Her father had often called it her warrior's stance. A subtle smile touched her lips at the memory. He would be proud, were he still here, as she walked past a group of teenagers loitering outside a corner store. One of them, perhaps 16, looked up, did a double take, and then nodded respectfully. "You military?" the boy inquired. Lena paused, meeting his gaze directly. "Something like that." The boy grinned widely. "Knew it. My cousin's in the service. He walks like you." Before she could respond, a friend of the boy's called him inside. And just like that, he was gone. She exhaled slowly. Moments like these reminded her why she fought, why she endured. She had spent years in places most people only encountered in war documentaries: Kabul, Baghdad, Mogadishu. She had led teams through pitch-black nights, through chaos and enemy fire, through sandstorms that swallowed sound and light. And now, she was home, walking streets that felt both familiar and utterly foreign. Her 20s had been spent in conflict zones, her 30s grappling with the aftermath of war. Now, in her 40s, she wasn't certain what the word home truly meant anymore. But her train of thought was broken. A patrol car idled slowly beside her, its sluggish pace out of place in a neighborhood where police typically sped by without a second glance. She continued walking, feigning disinterest, yet she knew the routine well. The passenger window rolled down, a gruff voice calling out, "Excuse me, ma'am." She stopped, turning slightly to face him. Officer Mark Olson. White, mid-40s, with closely cropped hair, thick arms, and a self-satisfied smirk that suggested he enjoyed this a bit too much. Mirrored sunglasses concealed his eyes, but she could feel their gaze on her, scanning her as if she were an anomaly. "What are you doing around here?" he asked. Lena met his gaze for a fleeting moment, her expression unreadable. She had encountered men like him before, men who saw a confident black woman and mistook it for defiance. She adjusted the strap of her duffel bag. "Just walking." "Walking where?" She raised an eyebrow slightly. "I wasn't aware I needed an itinerary to walk down my own street." Olson didn't appreciate that, his smug smile faltering ever so slightly. "We've had a few break-ins in this area," he stated. "Just need to make sure everything's on the up and up." Lena held his gaze, unwavering. "Do you see me breaking into anything?" Silence hung in the air. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He leaned against the open window, exhaling audibly. "Just doing my job." Lena breathed out through her nose, suppressing the urge to shake her head. "Yes, well, I'm just walking." She could sense the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Olson wasn't seeking a casual chat, he was looking for control. And something about her, be it her demeanor or her refusal to appear intimidated, clearly bothered him. She considered her options: continue the interaction or simply walk away. But before she could decide, Olson put the car in park. "Hold on a second. Let me see some identification." Lena remained still. Her training had ingrained in her the ability to assess threats, her surroundings, potential escape routes, and at this moment, She wasn't merely evaluating a man in uniform, but a man who seemed a little too comfortable wielding his authority. One thing she knew for certain: this was far from over. The street fell into a temporary hush, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional burst of conversation from a nearby storefront. But in this instant, all other sounds faded into insignificance. The tension between Lena and Officer Derek Olson was palpable, hanging in the air like the stillness before a storm. She remained motionless, utterly unfazed. "Identification," Olson repeated, this time with a sharper edge to his voice. Lena's eyes flickered down to his hand, noticing his right thumb resting casually near the snap of his holster. A silent, perhaps unconscious, warning. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon her. A few passers-by had noticed the stop, their pace slowing as they observed. Waiting, slowly, deliberately, she reached into her pocket, keeping every movement precise, and withdrew her military ID, holding it up for him to see but not handing it over. Olson narrowed his eyes at it, then back at her. "Military, huh?" His tone was difficult to decipher. Yet Lena had encountered men like him before. Men who saw a woman like her and decided that the uniform wasn't enough. The rank wasn't enough. "Where are you stationed?" "I don't answer unnecessary questions," she replied calmly. Olson exhaled audibly through his nose, his lips tightening. "Is that so?" He snatched the ID from her grasp before she could react, flipping it back and forth between his fingers. A self-satisfied smirk spread across his face. "Navy SEAL," he read aloud, drawing out the words as if it were some sort of amusement. How quaint. A flash of heat surged through Lena's chest, not so much anger as a deep weariness. The same sensation she had experienced countless times in rooms full of men who assumed she didn't belong. "Give it back." Her voice was firm, controlled. Olson looked at her, his head tilted slightly as if weighing whether she was worth the trouble. "You know, I've been on this beat for 20 years. Seen all sorts come through this neighborhood." He paused for effect. "Never seen a female SEAL before. You sure this isn't some kind of fake?" The blatant insult, so absurdly transparent, almost made Lena laugh. "You can run it through your system," she stated flatly. "You'll find out real quick." But that wasn't what Olson wanted. He wanted a reaction. He flipped the card again, his lips curving into a sneer as if he had already concluded she was lying. "You expect me to believe you've been out there fighting for this country?" "Excuse me." A subtle shift occurred, almost imperceptible, yet Lena registered it. The onlookers, their initial curiosity was evolving. This was no longer just a routine traffic stop, it was becoming something else entirely. Now, a young woman stood on the sidewalk, a phone held steadily in her hand. Recording. She made no attempt to conceal it, she wanted Olson to see. That was the nature of power. It shifted depending on who was observing. Olson noticed, his shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly, his posture subtly adjusting. "You got a problem?" he directed at the woman. She offered no verbal response, her focus remaining fixed on her recording device. Lena remained as still as a statue, a faint smirk playing on her lips. Now Olson was the one under scrutiny. He shot a glare back at her, his jaw clenched tight. "I don't appreciate people trying to make a scene while I'm on duty." "Then maybe don't make a scene," Lena retorted. A dark flicker ignited in his eyes. He took a step closer. Just a fraction, but enough to make it a deliberate move. A challenge. Lena didn't flinch. "I don't know who you think you are," Olson said, his voice low. "But I'm the one giving the orders here." Her smile was subtle, just enough for him to know he was making a mistake. "Are you sure about that?" Olson tightened his grip on her ID. And then he did exactly as she anticipated. He reached for her wrist. Bad move. The instant Derek Olson's fingers made contact with Lena's wrist, she moved, fast, precise, calculated. Her arm shifted just enough to break his hold before it fully formed. Not aggressively, not in a way that could be misconstrued as assault. Just enough to demonstrate control. Surprise flickered across Olson's face. He hadn't expected that. The crowd watching continued to grow. The woman filming took a step forward. A man across the street folded his arms and shook his head. A couple by the food truck had stopped eating altogether. All eyes were fixed on them. Lena exhaled softly, maintaining her composure. Training had ingrained restraint into her very core. Discipline was paramount. That's assault, Harper. Olsen's voice dripped with misplaced confidence, as if the mere accusation granted him authority. Lena barely blinked. No, that's called avoiding unnecessary contact. His expression darkened. You think this is a joke? She tilted her head slightly. Do I look like I'm laughing? A fleeting look of frustration crossed his face. Olsen had anticipated compliance, at the very least cooperation. Instead, he was met with resistance cloaked in an unnerving, impenetrable calm. He didn't like it. His hand instinctively moved towards his radio. I need backup. Backup for what? Lena interjected smoothly. Olsen's lips thinned into a hard line. For an incooperative subject. A snort of laughter rippled through the onlookers. Someone muttered, "That's a load of crap." Before quickly falling silent, the woman holding the phone spoke up. Incooperative? You're the one causing all the commotion. Olsen's ears flushed red, but he didn't turn to look at her. He was too deeply entrenched in his bruised ego. Lena could see it. Olsen wouldn't back down. Not now. Not with so many eyes on him. She had to choose her next words with precision. "Officer Olsen," she said. Her tone measured. "You're making a mistake." His nostrils flared. "Number. You're the one making a mistake thinking you can just walk away from me." He took another deliberate step closer. "Invading her personal space. Turn around. Hands behind your back." Lena inhaled slowly. She could feel the shift in the energy. The moment escalating. She knew where this was heading. Olsen wanted to make an example of her. He wanted to slap the cuffs on her. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she hadn't obeyed him in the way he expected, and that she wouldn't allow. The crowd sensed it too. A low murmur rippling through them. Phones held higher, the air thick with unspoken tension. Lena could feel her heart rate steady, her instincts growing sharper. She had three options. Submit to the cuffs. Allowing herself to be treated like a criminal in front of the entire neighborhood, not an option. Flee. Triggering a chase. Far worse. Or stop this before it spiraled into something neither of them could undo. She chose the third. "Olsen," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "If you handcuff me, you will regret it." His smug smile flickered back. But this time it was strained. "Is that a threat?" Lena's gaze remained unwavering. "Number. It's a fact." But Olsen had made his decision. His hand dropped to his belt. And that was the last mistake he made that day. The instant Olsen reached for his handcuffs, Lena moved, swift, fluid, intentional. Before his fingers could even close around the metal, she pivoted. A simple maneuver, a calculated redirection. One step forward, one step to the side. Nothing more, but it was enough. Olsen lost his balance, his eyes widening for a split second as he realized he was no longer in control. Lena didn't strike. She didn't need to. All she did was slip out of his grasp with an ease and precision that made Olsen look clumsy and foolish in front of the onlookers. Everyone must have seen it, as if he had just stumbled, tripped over his own feet. And that was more damaging than any physical blow. The collective gasp from the bystanders confirmed it. "Damn, she just slipped right out of that," someone muttered. The young woman with the phone zoomed in, her expression unreadable. Olsen's face flushed crimson. His breathing grew more rapid, his chest heaving as if he had just suffered the gravest of insults. Lena stood perfectly still, her hands relaxed at her sides. "Officer Olsen," she said slowly, deliberately, "you're losing control of the situation." His jaw clenched so tightly she thought his teeth might shatter. She had humiliated him without even laying a hand on him. He couldn't let this stand. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." His voice was sharp, cracking with raw frustration. Lena breathed out through her nose. "For what? Resisting arrest?" A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Arrest for what?" A man near the corner store called out. "We all saw she didn't even touch you." Olsen ignored them. His fingers twitched, itching to grab something, anything. Lena had seen this before. A man cornered, desperate to reclaim authority. She gave him one final chance. "You don't want to do this," she said evenly. "Think it through." Olsen's breathing grew heavier. His pride was screaming, demanding he reassert control, prove his dominance, put her in her place by a woman he had assumed he could easily intimidate. Silence descended, thick with anticipation. Olsen's breathing was heavy and uneven, his body rigid with shock. Olsen's face flushed crimson, his breathing more rapid, his chest heaving as if he had just suffered the gravest of insults. Lena remained completely calm. "Are we done here?" she asked. Her voice even. Olsen didn't answer, couldn't answer. Then another voice cut through the tense atmosphere. "What the hell's going on here?" A second patrol car had just pulled up. Sergeant William Burke, older, more seasoned, and just by the way he rolled his eyes between the two of them, he already knew something was wrong. Sergeant William Burke stepped out of the patrol car with a wary authority. His sharp blue eyes flicked between Olsen's flushed face, clenched fists, and heavy breathing, and Lena, who stood calmly, unflinching in the middle of the street. But it wasn't just them, the whole block was watching. Phones held high, conversations hushed. Everyone was no longer a bystander. They were witnesses. Burke let out a long, audible sigh. He had a feeling he knew what had transpired. Still, he turned to Olsen. "Officer Olsen, report." Olsen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He wanted to lie, to twist the narrative in his favor, to paint himself as the victim. But then Burke's gaze swept over the recording phones, the murmuring crowd, the stain of humiliation that had already spread. And Olsen knew there was no way out. She resisted. He finally managed. His voice hoarse, strained, wouldn't comply, became aggressive. A scoff came from the woman still filming. "That's a damn lie, and we all saw it." Burke didn't look at her, but Lena noticed the tightening around his eyes. He didn't believe Olsen's story either. He turned to Lena. "Lieutenant, what happened?" She didn't rush to answer. Didn't need to. "He stopped me for no reason. Asked for my ID. I gave it to him. Then he accused me of lying about who I am." She paused, just long enough for her words to carry weight. "When I refused to let him handcuff me without cause, he lunged at me. I stopped him." Burke exhaled slowly. He was assessing, weighing. He knew the optics of this. A white officer, a black woman, a crowd of witnesses with phones in their hands. A power play that had gone sideways. Then his eyes fell on the ID card still clutched in Olsen's hand. His expression shifted, from suspicion to recognition, then to something akin to regret. "Lieutenant Harper." Olsen's entire body went rigid at the sound of her rank being addressed by Burke. The murmuring in the crowd intensified. Olsen's face paled, his posture stiffening. Lena didn't blink, didn't show a hint of triumph or vindication. She simply waited. Burke's voice was lower now, but sharp. "Do you know who this is? Officer Olsen?" Olsen's fingers trembled around the ID card. He didn't answer. Burke didn't wait for an excuse. He turned to the crowd. "Anyone have footage of this entire incident?" At least a dozen hands shot up. The woman with the phone smirked. "Got the whole thing." Simmons swallowed hard. He knew what was coming. Burke's voice was cold. "Officer Olsen, you are relieved of duty. Effective immediately." Gasps, whispers. A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Simmons' face contorted, his hands clenching into fists. "Are you serious? I suggest you be quiet before you make this any worse." Burke's tone was final, brooking no argument. Simmons' nostrils flared, his whole body trembling with anger. But he had nothing left to say. Lena stopped, turning her head just enough to meet his gaze. "Perhaps after this, you'll think more carefully before treating others based on your prejudices," she said. Her voice calm but laced with implication. This story illustrates that true strength lies not only in outward authority but also in inner confidence and discipline, which enabled Lena to remain unfazed by Olsen's abuse of power, for which he ultimately paid the price. The solidarity and voice of the community played a crucial role in overseeing and reclaiming justice. And Lena stands as a powerful symbol, embodying self-control and compassion. The story also serves as a reminder of the silent battles against prejudice that still persist and the importance of standing firm, refusing to yield to injustice. Quote, "If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to hit the like button. Share it with others to spread the message. And please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. To not miss out on more great and engaging stories, be sure to subscribe to our channel today. Thank you for listening."